The name of our protagonist is Ganguch Choi, who is just your typical anime student. Okay, maybe not exactly typical, but more like an otaku. For him, it was better to be that way than to hang out with other people, or at least that's what Gangu wanted to believe, since he was always alone. He spent his time playing fighting games and celebrating his victories, maybe because he had been playing his whole life. For some reason, his gaming skills were unmatched, and yet he didn't feel completely lonely. He had a friend he could talk to from time to time about his games. That friend was across the room, a guy chatting with others. Or at least that's what should have been happening, because that same guy was actually threatening another student. He grabbed the student's console and hit him on the head with it, asking if he wasn't tired of this nonsense. The student stammered in response, immediately asking for it back. He had been at a very important part of the game and ended up getting distracted. That made the student angry. He started making threats and questioning the guy's attitude. The other classmates began kicking his desk too, creating chaos. In the process, the student's console got turned off, though they hadn't done it on purpose. They could never have imagined that would happen. The student started trembling, asking how he dared do such a thing. He stood up furiously because they had turned off his console right in the middle of the game, just when he was about to clear a level. They had no idea how hard he had worked to get there, and he wasn't going to forgive them for it. The boy lunged at the one who had threatened him, catching him off guard with his sudden courage. The others started beating up the student, knocking him off the desk and saying he didn't even know his place there. That's why they said otakus were so hated, and they began kicking him on the floor. Gangu just watched the scene quietly. It was a common sight in that classroom. That student was his friend, not the one making threats, but the one getting beaten. At the end of class, the two of them walked home together. Gangu asked if his friend was okay since he had seen him being bullied earlier. The friend replied that he was fine, that he was already used to that kind of thing. He didn't care about getting beaten up, he was more worried about his game. That made Gangu laugh. He wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or not. The friend said he needed to go home to check if his save file was still intact. The protagonist told him that if he had lost it, he could always start over. The friend agreed, asking if Gangu was going the same way as usual, and he confirmed, telling him not to let his guard down on the way back. The two said their goodbyes, and Gangu continued walking alone through the city. He was also a lonely gamer who spent his time that way, but he still wondered why Hyun-jun was always the one being bullied. The protagonist didn't know if it was because people thought his reactions were funny. Even so, Gangu had to stop by the game stores on his way home. That's when he saw a sign saying the place was for rent. He ran toward it, wanting to know what had happened for the store to be up for lease. When he opened the door, a woman inside recognized him. He greeted the owner, who told him the store was closed that day, but he still wanted to understand what was going on since the shop had seemed to be doing well. That's when the owner explained that she had decided to rent out the shop for some reason. She said it was simply necessary at that time. The following week, she had a goal to meet. Gangu wondered if she had managed to get all the money she needed. Even if that was the case, the protagonist felt sad that she had closed the store like that. After all, he had been going there since elementary school. He would always stop by several times on his way to school to have some fun. But it was true. She was also disappointed to have to close the store because she knew Gangu was one of her regular, loyal customers. But now, she said, he was grown up and seemed focused on his studies. The protagonist chuckled at her words. There wasn't much there for him anymore. He already owned almost every game in the shop and wondered what else he could even buy. She replied that a lot of things had sold out over the weekend and she hadn't had time to restock since she was preparing to rent out the place. At that moment, she asked if he wanted her to recommend a new game. Gangu was surprised. After all, he already knew most of the games. Then the owner explained that it was a mobile game. The protagonist was intrigued since he didn't expect her to sell that kind of thing in her shop. Normally, people just downloaded mobile games directly to their phones instead of buying them in stores. She explained that this wasn't a regular game for sale, it could only be downloaded using a special QR code she had. The game was called Real World Mobile. She handed him the code so he could scan it, download the game, and see what it was like. Gangu was curious, but did as she asked. Soon, she noticed he was already installing it and told him to go home and try it out. She thanked him again for always stopping by the store on his way home, and that was how he said goodbye to the game store that had been part of his entire childhood. The The farewell gift from the store's owner was that very game. Gangu had no idea how much this game would turn his life upside down. When he arrived home, he announced his arrival, and his mother greeted him. She told him to change clothes and come down to eat. In his room, he realized how tired he was after class, but before doing anything else, he decided to check out the new game that had just come out. Real World Mobile was a game that all the developers promised would be fun. The protagonist wondered what kind of game it really was. Upon opening it, she was greeted with a congratulations message for joining as player number 96. A tutorial was about to begin to explain how the game worked. The tutorial mission shouldn't have been complicated, but there would be both rewards and penalties. The first mission was to drink water within an hour to earn rewards. If he failed, about 3 glasses in his house would break. Gang Metro was surprised because the reward for that mission was $8. It didn't take long for the mission to start, but Gang Metro still didn't know what to do. That was because there were no buttons on the screen, just a countdown. In the end, Gangu decided to ignore it and went downstairs for dinner. In the living room, his family was having fun, watching TV and relaxing. His mother approached with glasses of strawberry milk, but suddenly twisted her ankle and all 3 glasses fell to the floor, shattering instantly. Everyone panicked and rushed to help her. Gangu was shocked by what he had just witnessed while his sisters helped his mother. He didn't want to believe that the game had actually made the penalty real, but when he looked again, he realized that about an hour had already passed since the start of the mission. His family decided to help their mother after the fall and clean up the mess. His sister noticed him lost in thought and told him to stop staring into space, but Gangu kept daydreaming until his sister yelled in his ear to wake him up and snap out of it. Then he ran outside while getting scolded by his sister for being in a rebellious phase. Back in his room, the protagonist rushed to grab his phone immediately. When he looked, the game was notifying him that the daily mission was now available. As soon as he opened the notification, a strong flash of light blinded him for a moment. Suddenly, a girl named Ra appeared before him, the guide responsible for Real World Mobile. Gangu was confused, but Ra noticed that he had failed the tutorial. That's why 3 glasses in his house had broken as a result of the penalty. The punishment in this game always applied in real life, so he needed to be careful. As expected, the protagonist had been right about what had happened. Ra explained that if he failed 20 more missions, it would be game over. In that case, he would never again be able to enjoy the fun of the game. He still had 5 missions per day to complete, so he needed to keep an eye on that. Having said that, she finished explaining the rules of the game. Then she said goodbye to the protagonist, ignoring his pleas for her to wait. Gangu then shouted that she was an idiot, and to his surprise, the girl froze. She turned around angrily, giving him such a scare that he jumped. Then Ra forced a smile and said goodbye again, disappearing from the screen. At that moment, Gangu wondered if this was really a normal game. After all, breaking glasses in his house and affecting real life shouldn't be something ordinary, and it even seemed like the character on the screen could actually hear his words. The protagonist decided to search Google for the game. He noticed that there were no results for Real World. It was the same across all other search apps on the internet. He wondered how that was possible. Maybe Gangu should have just deleted the game for good. That's when he remembered the shop owner and thought he should ask her about the game. So Gangu got ready to leave while his sisters complained. After not doing anything when their mother fell, he still had the nerve to go out. He apologized, saying something urgent had come up that he needed to deal with. Leaving them behind, Gangu ran through the streets toward the shop. He wondered why the shop owner had recommended such a ridiculous game. He needed to find her and get answers to his questions. Suddenly, his phone notified him that there was a new daily mission to complete. Startled, Gangu stopped to check the message and the notification. Rick greeted him, saying that another mission had arrived for him. This time, it would be different from the tutorial. He had failed the previous mission and received the penalty, losing 1 life, so he needed to be very careful. To start, his first mission was to confess to his crush. The character was shocked by this mission, but Ra was having fun. After all, he would only have 1 hour to complete it. If he succeeded, he would gain 1 centimeter in height, but if he failed, one of his family members would have an accident, which completely shocked him because that was a massive penalty. Either way, Ra ignored his protest and let the mission begin for real. The protagonist still couldn't believe something like this could be real. That was because the girl he liked and needed to confess to was one of the delinquents at school. He liked her a lot, but she was far too intimidating to approach. The character thought he might die of embarrassment in the process. Either way, there was no way this game could actually be that real. The broken glasses must have just been a coincidence. He still couldn't fully believe it, but even so, part of him couldn't pretend it was completely fake. The thought of one of his family members getting hurt made him deeply worried. For now, the protagonist decided that he would confess to his crush, Jisun Yam. He had never confessed to anyone in his entire life. Still, he would try, even if his crush at school was a delinquent. Besides, Gangyu was about to have a problem because he didn't even have her number. The only classmate contact he had was Hyen's, and he seriously doubted that Hyen would have Jisun's number to help him. But there were no other options. For now, he would just head to school. Maybe he could find an emergency contact list that could help him. Still, he wondered how things had gotten to this point. Running, Gangyu passed quickly by other people on his way to school. He finally arrived. Even exhausted, he hurried inside, and the boys who usually bullied him saw him. They recognized him and wondered why he was at school at that hour. Gangyu always stayed by himself at school, but his loneliness truly bothered him. Even so, they thought it would be too much trouble to mess with him again. It was easier to go play billiards. Gangyu didn't seem like the type to give fun reactions. No one was as entertaining to tease as Hyen. The protagonist ran and found the emergency contact list to use. Gangyu knew he should have paid more attention. He had never realized that it had been on the podium the whole time. Soon, he found the contact of his crush, Jisun and immediately got nervous. Now that he was about to call her, his anxiety only increased. Gangyu couldn't do it. He didn't even know how he would face her afterward. He had never spoken to her during class, only watched her from afar. Still, would he have the courage to confess? It seemed absurd. Suddenly, while he was panicking, a voice asked what he was doing there. It was a security guard warning him that the school was about to close. Gangyu got startled and apologized to the guard for taking his time. However, he memorized Jisun's number to call her later. When he left the school, he decided that he would call her no matter what. They said that if he didn't, someone in his family would end up having an accident. So Gangyu tried to convince himself that he had to do it, even if it hurt. It was for his family's sake. But he was still too nervous to take the first step. Finally, after a moment, Gangyu timidly decided to call. He asked if it was Jisun's number, and she replied yes, wanting to know who was speaking. The protagonist apologized, stuttering, because he had called out of nowhere, and introduced himself saying they were in the same class. But Jisun didn't remember him. Gangyu was shocked that she didn't even remember he existed. So he laughed awkwardly and explained that he was the guy who always stayed in the back of the room playing games. She probably had never noticed him, but Jisun finally remembered. After all, he was the game freak, and she asked how he got her number. Nervously, Gangyu tried to explain, but since he was taking too long, Jisun got irritated, telling him to hurry up and say the truth until Gangyu shouted that he liked her. After a long silence, she tried to respond, but the call dropped. He thought that even a loser like him could recognize her beauty, but still, it had been kind of fun. Jisun, on the other hand, wondered if she could use that situation to her advantage and called the boys who were always making threats at school. When she heard they were playing pool, she refused to go, saying that a boy had just confessed to her. That irritated them, and Jisun laughed, realizing she was becoming too popular for their liking. She mentioned that he had confessed without even knowing she already had a boyfriend, which was obvious, but the guy still wanted to know the name of the idiot who had done that. Jisun told him about the weird guy from the back of the class who was always playing games. The boys were furious when they heard that. Gangyu seemed like he wanted to die. The two were ready to take him down the next day.
Meanwhile, Ganggu was almost having a heart attack after managing to confess. Still, he completed his first mission, for better or worse, but there was no way to know what would come next because of that action. He knew it was just a game, but in truth, Ganggu hadn't managed to confess properly. In the end, the call suddenly dropped. Jisun didn't even try to call back. He tried to convince himself that it was normal, since she would never do that anyway. It wasn't time to think about that. Gang had to go to the game store to meet the owner. He had already forgotten because of the mission, but that was his real objective. The protagonist ran there but found the store closed. And besides, the place had been completely empty since she had left. Incredibly, Ganggu had wasted too much time focusing on his mission. He still had so many questions about the game he had received. So the protagonist decided to return home completely defeated. His sister immediately complained. First, because Ganggu had left without caring, even though their mother was injured and the house was full of broken glass, and then because he had come back so late, not caring about anything else. The protagonist apologized again, but he knew she didn't understand what he had been through. Their mother told the sister to calm down, since she wasn't that badly hurt. Still, the sister insisted that Gangu needed to understand a bit more about real life. He was always stuck playing games and didn't care about anything around him. Gangu tried to defend himself, saying it wasn't true, and tried to back away when his sister approached. But then she noticed that something about him was different for some reason. A small change that, at first, she couldn't define. The protagonist was confused about what she meant by that. Then, his sister commented that Gangu looked a bit taller than usual. Before, they had been about the same height, but suddenly, he was taller. Thinking about it, their mother agreed that he really did seem to have grown. Even though he was still young and had room to grow, it still felt strange. The sister found it really weird because that kind of thing should happen gradually, but Gangu had grown overnight, which was very suspicious. The protagonist nervously stammered, saying they were making a big deal out of nothing, and went to his room deciding to sleep because he didn't want to get involved in that. Either way, now Gang was wondering what exactly that stupid game was. The next day, he decided to go to school with his sisters. He hadn't even slept well the night before. His head was still a mess. The other sister, still surprised, mentioned that Gang really was taller than usual. She hadn't noticed before, since she was always shorter. The protagonist thought that, in the end, it wasn't something to worry too much about. Another girl quickly appeared, saying everyone should go to school together. She was the younger sister's friend and greeted the protagonist. She decided to walk beside Gangu and said goodbye, telling him they'd meet later. Gang felt that, at least for now, things were settling down. He wanted to be alone anyway, so he could clear his mind. Suddenly, a voice appeared asking if he really thought he would be left alone. It was one of the guys who was always making threats, laughing because Gangu looked pretty busy. The delinquent commented that he had recently heard about Gangu confessing to Ji-sen. Even the protagonist had already forgotten about that since he was so focused on the game. Gangu walked to school accompanied by the delinquent, who kept laughing at him, saying that a loser like him had the guts to confess to that girl. Even the protagonist didn't know how he had found the courage to do that. However, the delinquent mentioned that Ji-sen was actually Dong's girlfriend all along. Damn! The guy who made threats together with his friend Hyen was really terrifying. Gangu froze in shock. He had never known that. After all, he had always been glued to his game screen and stopped paying attention to things around him. At that moment, the protagonist said he didn't know that when he confessed. The delinquent replied that of course he did, because now he had gotten himself into trouble for messing with her. After all, Dong was the leader of the school fights. It was quite a shock. Although the guy was, in a way, praising his boldness, Gangu replied that it was all just a misunderstanding. It didn't take long for Dong to start looking for him to get revenge. The delinquent patted Gangu on the back, wishing him good luck, but Gangu was sure things would only get more complicated. This wasn't good at all. For now, he had to focus on skipping class and getting away. If he was careless and ran into that guy, he could end up really dead. But then, Gangu received a notification saying that a new mission was available. That made him furious because that damn game was wasting his time. Now he had no way to distract himself. It was a matter of life and death. But Ra didn't care about his worries and greeted Gangu the same. She was all smiles, even seeing the protagonist looking completely defeated. The daily mission was very simple for a student like him. The first thing he had to do was pay attention in the first class and not fall asleep. Gangu couldn't believe the audacity of that game assistant. She was laughing at him and how much trouble he was going to have at school because of her. It seemed like the hardest mission of all, but Ra assured him he would receive rewards if he succeeded. If he failed, his younger sister would get in an accident afterward. Gangu realized the game was truly cursed for putting so much pressure on him. The penalties were always extreme, far too extreme in his opinion. Ra ignored his complaints and wished Gang good luck with the mission. Now he had no choice but to make it work. There was no escape. It didn't take long for Gang to return to school, still deeply worried about his life. Around him, students were whispering and gossiping about something. It was about the class loser who had confessed to Ji-sen. After all, the guy who was always playing games suddenly became famous for doing something bold. That caused quite a stir, and everyone knew Dong was furious. Ganggu felt like he was going crazy as those rumors spread. It didn't take long for Dong himself to show up in the classroom, leaving him in shock. Some delinquents commented that they could go out and pick on freshmen, but Dong refused, saying that there was something more important. He was in a bad mood. Even Hyen noticed that Ganggu was worried about something. The first class started, and the protagonist tried to focus, but it was difficult. Ji-sin looked cheerful and confident because she had already told everything to her boyfriend. It didn't take long for class to end, and the teacher reminded everyone about the homework. When they were alone, a classmate approached Ganggu and told him to follow, saying they had to go somewhere else. Now, as he left the school, he ended up running into the delinquents. Some of them quickly made sure the teachers wouldn't find out what was happening. Ganggu was still trembling with fear when one of them approached to interrogate him. They wanted to know why he had confessed to Dong's girlfriend. The protagonist tried to explain that he didn't even know she was his girlfriend, but the students didn't care because, thanks to Ganggu, the one who was furious now was Dong. It was ruining the whole class atmosphere because of his actions. It didn't take long before the protagonist took a punch straight in the face. Anyone would be furious if some idiot confessed to his girlfriend, and now was no different. Some girls watched the scene laughing, including Ji-sen, who sighed and said she didn't want to talk about it at the moment. They commented that Ganggu was a true loser, as expected. Still, it was strange because Ji-sen had to tell her boyfriend about it, after all. She knew that telling Dong was basically giving Ganggu a death sentence. For Ji-sen, it was all just fun. In the end, it was his fault for confessing. The girls were amused. As expected, from the cruel Ji-sen, she didn't care at all.
Meanwhile, Ganggu was being beaten like garbage. They laughed because he stayed silent even while being punched. That weird guy who always sat in the back of the class playing alone? It was unbelievable that an idiot like him had the guts to say such things. Confessing to the girlfriend of the toughest, scariest guy in school was pure madness. No one believed anyone would have the courage to do that. Since Gang kept quiet, they hit him even more to make him talk. They beat the protagonist non-stop, like a sack of potatoes. They laughed because Gang just let them beat him. To them, he was nothing but an idiot. The protagonist himself couldn't believe he was suffering so much because of a stupid game. He wondered if he was so scared that he could barely feel pain during the fight. The guys wanted Ganggu to at least fight back or cry to make it more entertaining. He should at least fight to regain his reputation. Even though he had been brave enough to confess before, now he was acting completely terrified. He should at least try a little. Ganggu just kept apologizing, unable to react. Then one of them said he had a new idea. They could do something different. Pointing to one of the guys beside them, they said if Ganggu fought him and won, they'd let him go. It sounded fun, but the chosen guy got angry just thinking about it. He asked if Ganggu really wanted to fight him and if he could handle it. Even though the protagonist refused, they didn't accept his words. If he didn't fight, they just keep beating him to pieces. They only wanted to make him braver. In the end, Ganggu was forced to fight anyway. Since the protagonist refused to raise his hands, the challenger immediately lunged at him. They got even angrier because he didn't try to fight back for real. At least that made Ganggu raise his fists while the others had fun watching his resistance. As expected of a brave hero, they didn't plan to go easy on him. The protagonist was pressured by the punches of the student pushing him back. None of that was fair. Ganggu wondered why he had to go through this. Ji-sun just watched, laughing, while a classmate recorded the whole scene with a smile. Ganggu began to grow furious, asking why they were doing this to him when he hadn't even done anything. It didn't take long for him to shove the opponent away. Everyone froze in surprise because the guy flew as if he were made of paper. He was still trembling where he stood after pushing him, but soon realized what he had just done with his own strength. The others were confused by what they had just seen with their own eyes. Ganggu turned to them, and one of them quickly ran off calling for help, as did the others who didn't want to end up in his hands. At that moment, the protagonist noticed that something had changed again. When he ran to grab his phone and check the game, he discovered that he had completed the mission. The game rewarded him with an increase of 1 point in his strength. That was probably why he had managed to make the guy fly with just a shove. Half shocked by everything that had happened so far, the protagonist fled from the scene. In the park, he He stopped to process everything that had occurred so far. It was all because of that game. His strength had increased by 1 point. Still, the amount of force he put into a simple shove had been enormous. Suddenly, Gangyu had become far too strong, even without feeling any difference in his body. That made him want to test his strength, maybe by kicking a tree to check for changes. Even though he had become stronger, a large, heavy tree shouldn't be affected by that. He approached the tree thinking that he had never fought anyone in his entire life. In fact, he had never even punched a punching bag to train. Gangyu hoped he wouldn't end up breaking his fist or something like that in the process. Breathing deeply, he tried to calm himself so he wouldn't get too nervous. All he needed to do was kick the tree. Nothing serious would happen. It would just be a light kick to check his strength, and so he did. But to his surprise, the tree simply split in half. It didn't fall, but it cracked. The people around looked in his direction, not understanding what Gangyu was doing. Realizing this, he ran off screaming, shocked that he had almost destroyed that tree. If he had hit the opponent earlier with a punch, the result would have been devastating. Gangyu could have become a murderer. That frightened him a lot. He had been too focused on the missions because the penalties were so severe, but he still needed time to understand exactly what that game was. He could end up involved in a major incident if he acted without thinking. When he saw his attributes in the game, his strength had increased by only 1 point. Normally in a game, you could see the details on a status screen. Gangyu noticed that there were also things related to a dungeon. He was curious and wanted to press the button to find out what would happen, but Ral appeared warning that he had to be level 5 before entering the dungeon. In that case, he still couldn't enter, which was expected. With that, he decided to check his attributes in the game, and that surprised him. Because the attributes started as decimals, his current strength was 1.1. That meant his original strength had only been 0.1. That explained a lot about the leap in strength he had experienced earlier. After all, he had practically become 10 times stronger compared to how he was before. His attributes looked pretty bad when he checked them now. His dexterity was 0.08 and vitality 0.05. Even so, Gangyu wondered if those numbers were really correct. He could understand the other attributes, but there was no way his luck could be 2 points. After all, he was just suffering so much because of that damned game. Gangyu still hadn't realized that the real reason he had entered the real world was something much greater than his mediocre luck. But it wouldn't take long. He would soon discover the absolute truth behind the origin of that game. Meanwhile, Dung became furious when he learned that Gangyu had knocked down the delinquent. Not to mention that all the other henchmen had fled, scared like rats. They should be fired as pickpockets. They were so useless. The guy stammered saying that Dung was wrong. Gangyu was stronger than they had expected. Still, Dung couldn't believe it, since it had been 3 against 1, and yet they only managed to make excuses for their incompetence. The boys insisted that Gangyu's strength was superhuman, hard to put into words. Still, Dung questioned what they were talking about, because all that was nonsense. He had no intention of leaving Gangyu alone just because his men were bad fighters. In fact, he decided that he would take care of that kid himself. Meanwhile, the protagonist left after skipping classes. He wanted to go home, but he ended up leaving his backpack at school after the fight. Anyway, as long as Gangyu had this power, at least he wouldn't get beaten up. But he still didn't want to go to class. He was sure he would end up getting into trouble. So he decided that for now he would just skip classes and walk alone. Suddenly, the protagonist received a call asking where he was. On the other end was Dung asking if he wasn't going back to school. He couldn't keep running from the fight like a coward, especially after messing with someone else's girl so brazenly. Dung knew that Gangyu always got tangled up in games, but this was a surprise. He never imagined that Idea could have enough strength to fight back, and he wondered if he would have decided to gather the courage to flirt with a girl like that. The other guys said Dong should stop, because Gangu's strength was out of the ordinary, but Dong shouted for them to shut up because they were useless anyway. Then he ordered Gangu to go to the school roof at that instant, and told him to hurry because he had a school backpack in hand. If he didn't want his precious things destroyed, he should come see him or all his games and consoles would be destroyed and turned to dust. Gangu was frightened because they were using his games as hostages. Dong warned that if he didn't return before the end of class, he would make sure. Besides, he should know about his only friend, Hyen, who had always been threatened. He would kick his ass so everyone would know he had become an easy target in his hands. Damyang questioned why they needed to involve him in all of this, but Dong refused to answer and joined the boys to spare in the middle of it. Time passed and the students went to class, with Dong also heading to the classroom. His classmates commented that they still thought he would have trouble dealing with Gangu. There was no way to take down someone with that kind of strength. They were terrified. Some even wanted to find a way to stop Dong before it was too late. It didn't take long for the students to notice that Gangu had also returned to class, and he apologized for being late. The teacher simply accepted his return without question.
Hyein and Young glared at the protagonist when he arrived. Gangu felt relieved that it didn't seem like they had gone after Hyein yet. At least the others saw that he decided to show up and face the fight. Time passed and classes ended. It didn't take long before Deong approached Gangu. He asked if he had decided to start a fight, and the protagonist tried to explain. After all, it had just been a misunderstanding, but Dong told him to shut up because he had heard that Gangu had knocked down Minsu earlier with one hit. Even so, he thought Gangu still dared to mess with his girlfriend like that? The protagonist tried to explain that it was all a misunderstanding, but Deong sneered because, according to him, every time things got ugly, it was always a misunderstanding. Instead, he invited Gangu to follow him since they should settle things on the rooftop. With no choice, the protagonist was taken there, where he would end up fighting him. There seemed to be many misunderstandings between them, but Deong wasn't good with words, so Giri didn't think they could resolve things peacefully. They would have to settle it with their fists instead of talking. Dong had heard that Gangu had a really powerful punch and wanted to see it in action. Gangu asked if that would make him feel better, and Deong replied that that's just how he felt. But things had changed since he had knocked down Minsu. Ever since then, his two dumb followers had been terrified of him. That's why Deong wanted to experience the protagonist's techniques firsthand. At that moment, he charged at him like a bull ready to fight. Gangman immediately realized he couldn't strike back yet. When he thought about it, he realized he was in the middle of something really wrong. It would be better to just let himself get beaten up. Deong would be satisfied, and thanks to the status he had earned as a reward, Gangu shouldn't get hurt. At least that's what he thought. But the first punch proved that he was going to feel a lot of pain. He couldn't believe it hurt so much that he wanted to retreat. He thought some delinquents were just stronger than others. That left Deong confused as to whether Gangu really had no intention of fighting back at all. After all, he was just taking the blows without retaliating. The others watched the scene as Gang took punch after punch while Dong taunted him to fight back, warning that otherwise he would just suffer even more. And I almost forgot to mention, Dong had already smashed all the consoles that were in Gangu's backpack, which really caught Gang by surprise. He immediately sent Deong flying. It was a punch driven purely by rage, and the fight was over. The blow was so powerful that it broke the wall, and all of that happened while two second-year students were fighting. People were shocked that something like that had happened on the school rooftop. They hadn't even seen it themselves, but the story was already spreading fast. It didn't take long for the protagonist to tell his family he had been suspended from school. His sister shook him angrily, demanding to know how something like that could have happened. They could hardly believe he was capable of getting into something like that. Normally, Gangu would never get involved in a fight, but that's exactly what happened. Even his mother was shocked that Gangu had actually ended up fighting someone. Even more surprised, his sister shook him again after hearing that Gangu had fought not just once, but with several others. He asked her to let go of him. That was why their mother had been called to school. Gangu almost felt dizzy, but his sister was observant. She noticed he had not only grown taller, but had also built some muscle and looked stronger. She wondered if he had always been like that. She had never noticed him training before. Gang decided to go to his room to rest for a while and walked away from her. He was exhausted and his head was a mess after the earlier fight. Suddenly, he was hit in the head with a roll of toilet paper. That annoyed him, as his sister's attitude had been unbearable lately. She yelled that Gang was ignoring the fact that he was causing problems for his mother. He had gone to school after fighting and hadn't even tried to explain himself. Gangu realized she was upset because he hadn't tried to apologize to his mother. His mother looked tired, sighing as she asked her daughter to stop. Even so, all Gang could say was that he had no choice. He walked away grumbling that they were always bothering him. His sister was a little shocked by his reaction. He was being really rebellious. Besides, she would never be able to understand him if he kept refusing to talk to her. Even Gang was frustrated because they didn't know anything about what had really happened. He was irritated because the pressure from the game was making him act that way. Cyan, the protagonist, lay down to try to rest a bit. Gangu knew he had no right to be angry at them for that. He understood where their questions were coming from, even if they bothered him. But he didn't even know what to do anymore. They wouldn't believe him if he told them about the game. He had been so stressed lately from the game that he felt like he was going to lose his mind. Suddenly, Gang received a new notification from Real World Mobile. On the screen, Ra appeared, greeting the protagonist after a while. She praised him for completing all his daily missions so far without failing. Still, Gang replied that anyone could do the missions with such bad penalties. Ra said he seemed determined to keep playing and explain more details about the game. He could review the rules on the explanation screen.
The first thing every real-world mobile player had to know was this: he could invite up to 3 other people to play with him. Gang was caught off guard, but Rag kept explaining. The person who received the invitation could choose whether to accept it or not. After that, they would become a real-world mobile player, which surprised him. The second important rule was that the maximum number of users was 100. Once that number was reached, no more players could be invited. If a player left or was eliminated, a new one could be added. Gang realized there really was a limit, which explained the screen he had seen before. After all, he had been player number 96 when he joined. The assistant continued, saying they could always check the total number of players. They could also notice that Real World Mobile was only available in that country. In other words, all participants in the game were Korean, and there would be no others. Now, the final rule was
was about how they could leave the game. Daniel grew curious about that, and Ra explained that normally there were between 1 and 5 daily missions. He would have a total of 20 life points, and the game would end once all were lost. Failing a mission would result in losing 1 life point. That meant he'd have to accumulate about 20 penalties before being expelled. The end of the game also meant the end of his life as a player, and he could simply leave the game whenever he wanted. That finally concluded the explanation of the rules. Ra finished and said goodbye. Gangu realized that, in theory, he could leave the game anytime he wanted. But then, Rad decided to take the opportunity to offer him a new mission. He had to run 10 laps around the school field before the end of the day. Completing the mission would earn him a total of $76 in his account. If he failed, one of his greatest treasures would be destroyed. The character got irritated by that because Ras simply said it and left without any further explanation. The protagonist was still thinking about the fact that he could leave the game whenever he wanted. Even so, he decided to go out and run, as the mission required. He didn't intend to give up so easily. He needed to finish the game at any cost. Normally, his own rule was to complete any game he started, no matter how difficult it was. Genga wondered how it would end, as if it were even possible to finish that stupid game or lose to something like that. But there were good things happening too. He was growing, getting taller and stronger. Little by little, Gengu began to gain more confidence in himself. As the protagonist ran, Dong and his friend watched. That Damotaku wasn't such a loser after all. He kept running like an idiot. The delinquents were surprised that Gang was training like that and wondered if he always did these kinds of things every day. 5 days had passed since he had been suspended from school. He felt it was really strange not going to class when he wasn't there, but at least Gengu had managed to complete his daily mission since then, which involved doing some exercises according to the requirements. That allowed him to earn some rewards and level up as a result. The protagonist could choose to gain 1 status point whenever he leveled up, but he kept saving them since he wasn't sure if it was a right choice. In total, the protagonist had accumulated 3 points, and before he knew it, it didn't take long for Gangdid to reach level 5, which made Ra celebrate. Now that he had reached level 5, he could freely visit the dungeon. He remembered seeing the dungeon button before, but couldn't access it. Now, Gangu thought he hadn't been able to enter before because of the level restriction, but it was now unlocked for use. He wondered what exactly he could find inside the dungeon. Normally, in RPGs, players earned a large number of rewards by clearing a dungeon. At least, that's how it worked in regular games. Gengu wondered if he should give it a try. It could definitely be interesting. Maybe he could get even better rewards to use in real life. But he hesitated for a moment. This was a game he didn't fully understand yet. Could there be even a crazier penalty for entering the dungeon, especially considering the punishments he had seen so far? If he ended up dying in there, could he really die in real life? With that in mind, the character decided not to enter. There was no reason to take such a huge risk. Still, he was really curious about what was inside the dungeon. He was so curious that he couldn't sleep after unlocking it. He simply couldn't resist the urge to test it and see how far he could go. Genga clicked to check out what the dungeon looked like, at least for a while. He would take a quick look and leave right after. So he decided to click on the dungeon. His current level was 5, and he would be teleported to a dungeon that matched his level. Either way, he could leave immediately if it seemed too dangerous. Trembling with fear, Genga clicked the option and decided to enter the dungeon immediately. A bright light appeared on the screen so strong that the protagonist had to close his eyes. When he opened them, Genga was suddenly in the middle of nowhere. He had vanished from his room. He wondered where he had ended up and if that place was really the dungeon. Now he knew he had truly been teleported inside. It was absolute madness. Genga wanted to know how to get back home when suddenly, something changed before him. A screen appeared informing him that he could hunt 10 large brown bears within 10 hours. The mission would fail if the time ran out or if the player died. In the end, the protagonist had no choice but to complete the task. Suddenly, something exploded behind him, making him think it might be an earthquake. But when he looked, he saw the brown bears approaching to fight. Gang was terrified because those were real bears. This wasn't the same as a game. He realized that he would have to hunt 10 of those huge threatening creatures, but maybe he could handle it considering his current stats. The bear immediately charged at him and Gengu hesitated, taking a hit and being thrown back. It really hurt. He thought that no matter how strong he was, in the end, a bear would always be stronger than a human. If it weren't for the extra point he had added to his strength, he'd already be dead. Thinking about that, he remembered that he still had those 4 points he had been saving. This was a perfect opportunity to decide exactly how to use them. His body was still struggling to move after the blow he had taken earlier. The bears were still charging furiously towards the protagonist. Since Gang was now at the brink of death, he had to fight with everything he had to win. 1 point in dexterity and the other 2 in strength. That was his choice. By a very narrow margin, he managed to block the full attack coming at him. It was close, but at least the protagonist survived. He adjusted his stats just before things got too dangerous. The bear was ready to end his life with a single strike, but now things were different. He could fight back, even if it seemed insane to try something like that.
He grew stronger with just 1 more point in strength. Now that he added 2 more, it should definitely be possible. Gang was surprised to notice that his movements also felt much lighter. He practically soared when he jumped. That was because he had increased his strength stat. After muttering an apology, he threw the bear away as if it were made of paper. They were trying to kill him, so he had no other choice at that moment. But another Another bear was still rushing toward him in rage. He still had 9 more to defeat, and he had only taken down 1. Thus began the new battle between him and the bears, taking hits and then striking back. It sent him flying each time. Even after boosting his stats, it still hurt to be attacked. Gang had to make sure he didn't lower his guard while taking them down. Facing them all at once would be difficult, so he had to find a way to win. Determined, he ran across the terrain to make the bears chase him. As expected, they all had different builds and speeds. Because of that, they started spreading apart. This allowed Gang to kick the second bear away. The third, fourth, and fifth were also defeated right after. When it was over, all 10 bears were down, leaving him completely exhausted. He had never moved so much in his life before. It was the first time he seriously thought he might die in the middle of it all, but at least he survived. The mission was a success, and now the game even asked if he wanted to return to the real world. Of course he wanted to go home quickly, so he pressed the accept button. It didn't take long for Gang to return to his room, which was a real relief. What truly surprised him was that the pain caused by the bears had started to fade. When he picked up his phone, Rock congratulated him for finishing the dungeon cleanup. Now, he could enter the dungeon once a day and receive new rewards. That day's reward was a level up and a wooden staff. Ross said he would have the chance to upgrade his weapon set after clearing the dungeon. The item couldn't be used in real life, only inside the dungeons. After that, she said goodbye to the protagonist, promising to return later to talk about another mission. Gang then saw that a new mission had appeared on his phone screen. This time, he had to make new allies and find other mobile real-world players. That was complicated for Gangu, since he didn't even have friends in real life. It would be impossible to make friends who also played this game. For the first time, he was ready to give up on a mission and leave it aside. That was because there didn't seem to be any direct penalty for not completing it, although he could gain experience by making allies. During dinner, his family had to keep calling Gangu to snap him out of his thoughts. They wanted to know what was wrong since he was so distracted and ignoring his mother. He was caught off guard, and his mother asked if he was planning to go back to school. After all, his suspension would end the next day, and Gang hadn't even remembered that. He chuckled a bit. There was nothing to prepare. He would just go back to school. That surprised his mother since she never expected such an answer. Lately, Gango had been so focused on his missions that he had forgotten about school. Still, he was sure he would become a target of threats again, which was a little scary. Suddenly, he received notifications about a new mission waiting for him. As always, the timing of the notifications was terrible. Gangu wondered what exactly the mission would be this time. With that thought, he quickly finished his breakfast, to his family's shock. Then, he left the dishes, thanked them for the meal, and rushed out. His sister complained that he was rude and ate too fast. Even so, their mother gestured for Gangu to go without worrying. The sister grumbled that their mother was always spoiling her son instead of asking why he was acting so strange. He was always carrying his phone and then disappearing after looking at it. The other sister suggested it could be a girlfriend, which shocked them. It seemed impossible, but she believed it was obvious. It had to be a girlfriend waiting here his call all this time. Now, even his mother was starting to think the same thing, which was surprising. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but she had seen Gangu talking alone in his room. She noticed it was a woman's voice, and since then, she believed it was his girlfriend. That left her surprised, but it was expected. After all, her son was growing up. Normally, Gang was a loner who always seemed isolated. Somehow, miraculously, he had gotten himself a girlfriend, and that made his mother happy. Even his sister, who always complained, finally calmed down. After all, he was relying on someone. He was finally maturing in life. Now she understood why he spent so much time on the phone. The mother agreed that everyone should be more understanding and patient with him. Meanwhile, the character went to his room to check out the new mission that Rico had given him. Time passed, and the protagonist's suspension ended, allowing him to return to school. However, the atmosphere when he came back felt very different than usual. Sai noticed people whispering about him and stepping away in fear. All of it was because of what had happened with Dong. The other delinquents now were running from him. They fled in panic just at the sight of the protagonist, terrified. Even so, Gangu never really had any true friends. Namu, on the other hand, was being avoided for a clear reason. The teachers were also shocked. After all, he had always been so quiet, always sitting in the corner and playing alone. They never imagined he would end up sending a classmate to the hospital. Gang apologized to the teacher for causing so much trouble. It had been years since any student at that school had been suspended. She just hoped he hadn't caused problems for anyone else. Next time, the teacher wished he wouldn't do anything that could lead to suspension, and he tended to agree with that. All he wanted was a peaceful and quiet life. With no incidents until graduation, he didn't seem to have anything to worry about. At least the student council took that incident seriously as well. Rumor had it that the president wanted to talk to Gangu. He was told to go to the student council room as soon as possible. He admitted he never imagined something like that would ever be necessary. On the way there though, he ran into Dong. Startled to see him, Gangu froze, but Dong simply asked how he was doing. He could have never imagined being defeated by an attack like that. In fact, he had never lost a fight in his life, not even against upperclassmen or guys from from other schools. Gangu laughed nervously, asking if he had at least improved after that attack. The truth is, Dung had never thought he'd be humiliated in front of his friends. He was so furious that he kicked Gangu in the face, but Gangu didn't even move an inch. That shocked Dung, who couldn't understand what kind of person he was. Gangu laughed nervously again, pretending not to know what he was talking about. But Dung was stunned by how shamelessly he acted. Obviously, a normal person wouldn't take a kick in the face and remain standing. Still pretending, the protagonist said he needed to go to the student council and ran off, apologizing as he left the other behind. Dung was furious. He realized there was no way he'd be rid of him until graduation. Heading toward the student council room, the president was already waiting for him. Sheem, the president of the student council and one of the players of Real World Mobile, was expecting Gang's arrival so they could talk. After running for a bit, Gangu looked back to see if he had stopped being followed. Thinking about it, Real World Mobile really was an incredible game. He had practically become superhuman after leveling up and earning points. Then, he remembered that he was supposed to go to the student council room this time.
Meanwhile, the delinquents were walking around talking about Gang. They had no idea he planned to come back to school so soon. They couldn't even imagine that a guy like him could fight like that. They were just hoping Gangu wouldn't come after them for revenge. If he beat them up again, they'd probably die. That made both of them sigh, realizing they'd have to stay quiet until graduation. Their lives had always been rough. They just happened to end up in the same class as that weirdo. They thought he was just some loser they could ignore. This was the result. Or rather, maybe he wasn't a total loser. He still had that one friend. The other outcast was Yen Jun, who always stayed in the corner. The delinquents wanted to vent their frustration and thought of taking it out on him. They couldn't beat Gang, but they could handle Hyen. The two approached Hyen and quickly slapped the back of his neck. He just looked at them with that "you're idiots" expression, which made them even angrier. Hyen was getting cocky just because his friend had come back to school. But to their surprise, Hyen dodged the punch that came next. It was shocking to see that he could suddenly react like that. The others started laughing because the delinquent couldn't even land a hit on an idiot like him. That was starting to make him look bad in front of everyone. Hyen said that was enough, that he just wanted to focus on his game now. Enraged at being ignored, the delinquents shouted. To them, it was all because Gangu had returned. Or maybe Hyen had just gotten lucky dodging that punch. Suddenly, Hyen stood up and caught the next punch that came his way. The other ones charged at him too, but Hyen simply threw him away as well. Both of them were completely defeated by Hyen right in front of the students. No one could believe what had just happened, but Hyen had suddenly become strong. The truth was that he had also become a player over time. Meanwhile, Gang finally arrived at the student council room. In fact, he had never been there before and probably never thought he would go there before graduation. Nervous, Gang took a deep breath to gather his courage and stepped inside. Knocking on the door, someone inside told him he could come in. He entered, asking for permission and apologizing for taking so long to arrive. Kim smiled when she saw the protagonist. She had been waiting for him for a while. Right away, Gangu apologized for causing that incident earlier. He promised he would make sure not to cause any more trouble until graduation. She was surprised because that wasn't why she had called him there. She just wanted to confirm something. So Kim asked if he was a real-world mobile player. That caught him off guard. Gangu asked what she was talking about, but Kim replied that she had a good intuition for this kind of thing. She could tell right away when someone was a player. Real-world mobile was the only explanation for the strength he had now. Gangu stammered, saying he didn't know anything about that, which made her laugh. After all, it looked like he was trying to hide it. At that point, there was no point in pretending anymore. Kim suddenly pushed Gangu against the wall in a rather intimidating way. While saying she was also a player, he quickly jumped aside to dodge her. It was shocking to see that a girl with such brute strength. She was clearly having fun, and at the same time, Kim was also surprised. She hadn't expected to meet another player at school. Gangu also never thought he'd meet someone like her, especially someone that strong. Thinking about that, he remembered his mission to make allies. When he stopped, the protagonist took out his phone to check the mission. But suddenly, he saw it marked as completed for some reason. Even though he had never added a friend before, Gangu was confused. Kim asked what had happened. He stopped mid-sentence, unable to explain, until he saw that Hyen was listed as his friend. Then Ra appeared, congratulating him for completing the mission. As promised, a large amount of experience was given as a reward. That way, he leveled up and reached level 8, which left him surprised. Kim asked what exactly he was doing to look so distracted. She wanted to receive a friend request notification, and Gangu asked how he could add her as a friend. Then Kim explained that it worked just like a social network, SNS. If someone was in his contacts, Real World would automatically add them as a friend in the game. He handed his phone to the president so she could do it herself.
Ganggu wondered when his friend Haiyan had become a player. Even though that other game store had closed, it still felt strange. However, suddenly, she saw Kim move away and open the window. Out of nowhere, she simply threw his phone outside, leaving him in shock. The protagonist panicked, asking why she was doing that. Now he couldn't even see his missions if the phone was broken, much less the penalties. Or at least, that's what Kim made him believe, since she hadn't actually thrown the phone away. Ganggu was irritated, thinking it was far from funny since she was toying with his heart. She gave him the phone back, saying she was just playing a prank. After all, it had been pretty naive of him to hand his phone to another player without thinking twice about it. If it had been someone with bad intentions who destroyed the device, he'd be in deep trouble. He'd end up receiving penalties, and Ganggu realized he had really messed up. Kim warned him to be more careful if he ever met another player. There were many people who would see him as a competitor. Ganggu asked why she gave the phone back instead of breaking it. She said other players might see him as a rival, but she decided to be nice and warn him anyway. That made her laugh, because after meeting him, she felt there was no need to worry. Ganggu was a bit surprised because it almost sounded like a compliment. After talking with him, it didn't seem like Ganggu fought delinquents just to show off. At least, he felt relieved that she understood his reasons. In any case, Kim decided he could go now since they had already met. She only wanted to see what kind of person Ganggu was and added her number to his phone.
After leaving the student council president's room, the protagonist let out a sigh. He never expected to meet another player so soon, much less imagined that the student council president was one. But beyond that, Gangwoo was happy because now he had someone to talk to about the game. Thinking more about it, there was also Haiyan in his contacts. There was no way that was a mistake. Now, Gangwoo wanted to find his friend and ask him about it. Suddenly, he heard people shouting while watching something from the window. When he went to look, he saw Haiyan defeating two delinquents. They were charging at Haiyan, but he easily took them down. Everyone looked terrified. He seemed like a monster, knocking them down one by one. After dealing with all the delinquents by himself, everyone wondered what was going on. Haiyan didn't seem human to have that much strength in his fists. He said it was because they called him a loser otaku and a loner. It seemed like it was their fault for underestimating others. It must have felt good for them to be beaten by a loser otaku like him now. The delinquents were suffering to the point of tears, and everyone else just watched in shock. Gangwoo stood there observing, hearing the students beg him to stop. The protagonist didn't know what level Haiyan was or how many stars he had, but he remembered that when he was level 1, he had only managed to mark a tree by himself. A real-world player using his powers against the normal person could actually kill them. But Haiyan didn't care about any of that. He just kept pushing the delinquents down and repeatedly asking if they were having fun with this. The delinquents kept crying and cursing at him, pretending to be tough just because he had gotten a bit stronger than normal. They even said they might go after his mother after all this, which only made Haiyan angrier, hitting them even harder. Suddenly, the one who stepped in to stop everything was Gangwoo. He wanted to know what his friend was doing, since this way he could end up killing someone. The other students were still in shock because he had jumped from a high floor. Everyone watched the scene in disbelief. Even Haiyan wanted to know if Gangwoo really had jumped from above. Gangwoo replied that they could talk about that later, since there was something more important at the moment. After all, it was clear that Haiyan was trying to kill the delinquents by acting like that. He should have known that beating them like this wouldn't just result in a few bruises. Haiyan then asked if Gu really wanted to protect that trash. After all, it was Gangwoo himself who had sent one of them to the hospital, and Gangwoo laughed because he really hadn't meant to do that. Even so, Haiyan thought that if Gang could take revenge on the delinquents, then he had the right to do the same. Ridiculous. Not to mention that Gangwoo had only been threatened for one day, while Haiyan had been threatened his whole life and humiliated in front of everyone. That's when Gangwoo explained that, in truth, he had never done that on purpose. He just couldn't control his powers properly, and didn't realize how frightening they were. Even so, Yen told him to get out of the way, because he was interfering. Haiyan wanted revenge, but grew even angrier at those words. Gangwoo insisted that he stop since he was going too far. Haiyan should have known how much he had suffered at the hands of those guys. That's why he said he'd take the chance to kill them with his own hands. He kicked them without caring about anything, not even the consequences. It didn't take long for Gang to step in and put himself in front to protect the delinquent. Haiyan asked what that ADL was doing, getting in his way, while Gangwoo kept insisting for his friend to calm down and at least listen.
If Hyeon ended up taking that guy's life, he'd only get into even more trouble than before. That made Hyeon furious because he believed Gongwoo would never understand the pain he went through at the hands of those guys. To him, Gongwoo had only watched while he was beaten every day, so he said it was his right to take revenge. Even if Gongwoo called himself a friend, he had never helped him. That's why he considered him a real hypocrite and then kicked him away. The protagonist stood up even after all that, while Hyeon still wanted to keep beating up the delinquents. Even though they were unconscious, he intended to finish them off. To Hyeon, they should reflect on their sins and live a good life in the afterlife. Gongwoo charged at his friend trying to punch him, but Hyeon dodged. He knew his friend wasn't himself at that moment, so Gongwoo threw the unconscious delinquent over the other and told him to run away. As soon as the delinquents fled, Hyeon turned towards the protagonist. The two began trading blows, with Hyeon asking if he didn't understand. Of all people, it should have been Gongwoo who understood his anger, yet he was still getting in the way. The protagonist replied that he did understand, but needed him to calm down. At least they should talk before acting. Hyeon ignored his words and kept charging furiously at Gongwoo. The other students just watched and recorded the scene, amazed. They didn't understand what was going on between those two, who were fighting so fiercely. They almost looked like professional fighters causing that much destruction. Even Daeon showed up to see what was happening in the courtyard and was shocked to realize that Gongwoo was fighting again. He was even more stunned when he saw that Gongwoo was fighting Hyeon. Gongwoo threw his friend away, leaving Dawn unable to believe what he was seeing. Suddenly, Kim appeared, ordering them to stop immediately. If they kept causing trouble for the school, she would kill them both. Hyeon asked who she was, but warned that if she interfered, she'd end up getting hurt. That irritated Kim, since that wasn't how one should speak to their superior. He simply told her to disappear because she was meddling in his life. Kim was surprised that a boy like him would act that way towards her.
Gangwoo asked him to calm down since she was the student council president. That made Hyeon grumble because it was obvious she just wanted to boss everyone around. But it seemed Hyeon was the type who always felt threatened. Her comments only made him angrier. Then Kim mentioned that he was just seeking revenge. Now that he had power, he was showing exactly what kind of person he really was, and that only gave her a headache. Someone like him was called a real-world mobile. That left Hyeon surprised because she knew about the game, but she took advantage of the moment to rush forward and land a strong kick on him. They could still hear Hyeon, but she quickly made sure he was silenced. Gang ran to check if his friend was okay, but he had fainted along the way. Kim told him to take Hyeon to the infirmary and make sure he didn't cause more trouble. Gangwoo agreed, hearing her add that the two of them should go to the council room after lunch. A little later, the protagonist took his friend to the infirmary to be treated. The whole situation was ridiculous. Gangwoo never thought something like that could happen. He had only been added to the friend list not long ago, so the protagonist figured Hyeon must have become a player recently. Sighing as he saw his friend still unconscious, he decided to check more inside the game. When he opened the friend list, he saw that both Hyeon and Kim were still there. He wondered what would happen if he tapped on his friend's picture. When he did, Gangwoo could see Hyeon's entire character profile inside the game. It looked like he was still level 2, clearly having started that very day. He had probably only completed one mission and leveled up. Still, Gangwoo wondered how Hyeon managed to get into the game, since Daniel had only been able to join after being invited by someone through a QR code. Then suddenly, Hyeon replied that he had also been invited, which caught Gangwoo by surprise. He mentioned that the shop owner had also given him an invitation link to play. Gangwoo soon realized his friend had woken up. Hyeon replied that he still felt a little dizzy, but would probably be fine as long as he stayed quiet for a while. That was a relief, but Gangwoo grew curious to know more about it since the shop owner had disappeared and the shop game itself had closed some time ago. Hyeon agreed, but said it was before the shop finally shut down. It was a day those delinquents broke his console while mocking him. In fact, it was probably around the same day as Gangwoo's own experience. There were signs everywhere in front of the store saying it would be closing soon, so Hyeon ran inside before that happened. It turned out Hyeon had managed to fix his console just by going to the store. However, he couldn't repair it completely since the store was about to close. The owner apologized, saying it was her last day open so she couldn't spend much time on him. Instead, she offered him a fun game to play as a distraction, and that was when she gave him the invitation link to Real World Mobile. But he only installed it and never opened it to check the content until that moment. He preferred focusing on console and mobile games he was already used to, which made the protagonist laugh because he related to that.
Still, he didn't think it was right for Hyung to try to kill the delinquents over it, which made Hyung protest since his friend was scolding him again after everything he had gone through. Still, Gangu knew he was going too far, to the point of almost taking their lives. That could cause serious problems and get him imprisoned for life. Hyung shot back that he was in control the whole time. People didn't die just from that. Besides, it was Gangu who first started trying to take revenge on others. The protagonist quickly tried to explain that it was all a misunderstanding. Even so, Hyung found it a bit unfair that he was being so hypocritical. It didn't take long before a new voice appeared, calling the losers in the middle of their heated conversation. It was Deong, who showed up saying they seemed to be having a lot of fun. Hyung laughed because it was the perfect chance to settle some unfinished business. But Deong said they should leave that for later because he wanted to talk to both of them about something else. He wanted to know exactly what that so-called real world everyone was talking about really was. Gango realized he must have overheard their conversation all that time. Still, the two decided to ignore their issues and change the subject. Gango kept laughing and focusing on Hyung because it was more important for him to feel better. But Deong insisted that they shouldn't act like complete idiots. He had heard everything while outside the recovery room. Everything they said about earning real-life rewards and gaining powers. Gango replied that they were just talking about a light novel and it wasn't real. Dion agreed that normally, something like that wouldn't be possible in reality. However, according to him, losing to an idiot like Gangu was unbelievable. And not only that, the two of them had suddenly managed to take down several delinquents. In Dong's opinion, real-world mobile was starting to seem even more real. They were starting to corner the delinquents, and that made him furious. Hyun questioned whether that guy wanted to die or something, which irritated Dawn because it sounded like they were looking for a fight. Gango once again tried to stop his friend from doing something he would regret. While Hyun tried to remember how miserable his life had been because of them, Deong didn't care at all. It was his own fault for being a loser, which only made Hyun angrier, since he'd always thought about killing him all this time. For Gangu, it might have looked funny, but to Hyun, it felt like his life was about to be destroyed. Hyun only thought there was one thing to thank Dong for. If he hadn't broken his console, he would never have gained all that power. Dong, on the other hand, still didn't know exactly what this so-called real world was, but it did seem like they had actually gained some kind of power because of it. To make things worse, Hyung himself had started acting like a delinquent once he became stronger. Now they weren't that different from each other. In that case, if the situation was reversed, maybe he would have become even crueler to other kids than they had been. It must feel great to be in a loser's position like his just to justify yourself. Yan was truly furious hearing those absurd words. Dang rushed to hold him back, stopping him from lunging at Dong and finishing him off. At the same time, Dong took the chance to move forward, too excited to fight.
When Hyun took a direct punch, he countered with another blow to Hyun's face, as Duong thought. At that moment, Hyun had superhuman strength. The two began exchanging violent, furious punches. Gangu could only watch, deeply worried, as they tore the infirmary apart. Duan was impressed. For such a big guy, he was surprisingly fast. Even after becoming stronger through real world or whatever it was, Yen was still terrible at fighting. And that was clear. Even the protagonist knew Yen remained quite weak despite the game's power. After all, he had just reached level 2 and had barely started playing. Aside from the extra point in agility, his other stats were the same. But more importantly, Duong himself was impressive. His current perception and battle instincts were remarkable. No wonder he was considered the worst delinquent in the entire school. From Duong's perspective, if his attacks didn't land, the fight would go nowhere. In that sense, since he had gained an absurd level of strength, even greater than normal, maybe it was fair that he was using something to fight back. Yen took the lead and attacked again, eager to defeat him. Duan dodged the incoming punch, laughing at his attempts. Those were strong words coming from someone who had never fought back before. And so, the delinquent side of Hyun grabbed one of the tools from the infirmary. A weak person like him could never win against someone as experienced as Duan. Someone like Yen was destined to remain beneath him forever. That's all he deserved. Always pretending to be powerful. He would take this chance to finish him off and leave him eating dust once and for all. Besides, maybe he would stop hating him if he talked about the real world. Yen was still convinced that once he leveled up more in the game, he would destroy him. Duong realized this might be his best chance to finish him right there. Before he could strike Hyun again, Gangu kicked his weapon away. He truly wanted to solve things through words, not fights like this. Meanwhile, Kim sighed after realizing that two people there were players. Things were about to get troublesome.
Or maybe just more interesting? She paused to look at Gang's player card. She noticed that with such a low level, it seemed like he hadn't used many points yet. Still, for some reason, his stats were abnormally high. Normally, for his strength to be that high, he need 5 times more points. And it wasn't just strength. All his stats were extraordinary, increasing about 5 times more than anyone else's. Meanwhile, even Duong was startled when the weapon he was using flew away. Gangu's strength was truly superhuman, far greater than Hien had ever had. That made him laugh. Gangu replied that he was at a higher level than his friend and had allocated his points more efficiently. That was all. Now Duong began to realize he really wanted to hear what this real-world thing was about. He wanted to know if it was some kind of illegal activity that made him stronger, or maybe something like switching bodies for power. Hien replied that he didn't deserve to know anything and that they wouldn't tell him. Gangu said they should talk about it later. This wasn't the right time. Duong refused to stop fighting until he heard more about that game. He said he'd make sure the media found out about the stupid things they were doing. And when that happened, their lives would become miserable. Gangu kept restraining Hien and cursing Dong for his threats. That's when Kim appeared asking for permission to interrupt, but wanting to talk to Gangu. She completely ignored Hien and decided to take Gangu with her to the council room. But Duong refused to let him leave without settling things first. He was about to threaten her and say he was the one who ruled the school, but he didn't even have time. He took a direct hit from the president. After knocking Duong down with a punch, Kim decided she would take Gangu to talk. He had no choice but to go with her, afraid of her strength. It wasn't a discussion. She would make him follow her, no matter what. When they got to another room, Gangu commented that she didn't seem to be in a good mood. He almost worried that maybe he'd done something wrong to upset her. Kim replied that it wasn't anything in particular, she just wanted to check something. She had just sent him something in the game and expected him to accept it. When Gangu looked, it was an invitation to enter the training room, which surprised him. Even without the protagonist knowing what it was, she asked him to accept it without question. When he did, a bright light covered his eyes and the two of them ended up in another space. Kim explained that this was the training room, as the name suggests. It was a place where one could go to check their stats or simply train. You could also enter with another player who was registered as a friend. Gangu asked why she had brought him there this time, but before answering, she suggested that if he had any spare points, he should use them. Still, the protagonist didn't understand why everything had happened so suddenly. There was no particular reason. Kim just wanted to fight with everything she had, so she decided they should do it inside the training room to avoid destroying the school. That caught him completely off guard because she had suddenly decided to fight out of nowhere. Gangu worried. He thought he must have done something wrong for her to want to fight him. Kim simply says she would attack him in 5 seconds. If he hadn't used his saved points yet, he'd better do it fast. When she started the countdown, Gangu nervously opened his stats. Then she charged at him, throwing several punches at the protagonist in quick succession. He was still just a level 8 player, but Kim was level 32. She expected him to take it seriously. Otherwise, Gangu would really get hurt because of his leniency. Gangu dodged the next blows, still not understanding why she was attacking. At the very least, he wanted a reason, but Kim ignored him and kept hitting him relentlessly. She was clearly trying to hurt him with her punches and attacks. If he didn't pay attention to what she said, he'd end up seriously injured. Gong didn't understand any of it, but he knew that he couldn't die in the training area, so he decided to strike back, landing a kick that sent her flying backward. Kim couldn't believe it wasn't a mistake after being hit by him. She asked if he hadn't noticed anything strange during their fight. Gangu didn't quite understand what she was implying. Then she explained that there was nearly a 20-level gap between them, yet they were fighting almost equally, or rather, Gong was nearly surpassing her. She had checked her stats on the game app sometime before the fight, and her stats usually increased 5 times faster than normal players. When she attacked him, it was to confirm whether there was a display error on her profile screen, or maybe a glitch in the game itself, but apparently it wasn't an error. Now Kim was sure that Gangu had somehow cheated or that his character profile was bugged. It was a glitch that made his attributes increase 5 times more than everyone else's. That completely shocked him. It shouldn't have been normal for him to receive more points than others. But even Kim didn't know the reason. She had never met another player like him before.
Now that Gang thought about it, he had only added 1 point to strength, yet his attacks felt way more powerful than that. Reflecting on it, the protagonist realized it was because he was receiving 5 times the boost. However, Gangu became nervous at the strange way Kim was laughing. She looked excited and thrilled to see that he was special somehow. She wanted to keep him by her side and didn't want anyone else to know about that information. The protagonist still thought there was a chance others might find out, but Kim told him to keep quiet and simply not join other player teams. He should only be friends with her and no one else in the game.
Ganggu ended up agreeing, though he had no idea how to use that advantage for himself. It wasn't like he could use all that strength anywhere anyway. That made Kim laugh, because it was clear he still didn't understand anything yet. He would have a much easier time in dungeons and other missions because of it, especially since his level was still low, and he was doing simple quests. He could still do basic things like exercise or complete easy tasks. But as he leveled up, the missions and even the dungeons would become more difficult. Sometimes, they received missions that were nearly impossible to complete alone. A few weeks ago, Kim had gotten the mission to climb Mount Everest and another to run all the way to China. Ganggu was a bit shocked that they still had to do such ridiculous missions. She could simply ignore them, but reminded him of the penalties. If they got a game over, they wouldn't be able to receive any more rewards, like becoming taller or more attractive. There were several useful rewards, normally things that couldn't be improved in real life. Besides, Ganggu was a gamer used to other games. His gamer pride would never allow him to abandon a game midway. It was such an incredible game, something most people could only dream of playing. Even now, Kim was eager to be carried by him, or rather, to work together from then on and grow stronger. Ganggu could see in her expression how ready she was to take advantage of his bug. Either way, she decided they should leave the training room. The conversation they had was important, and at least no one else had overheard it. Back in the real world, Kim told Ganggu to get used to traveling that way. The light that appeared was temporary and wouldn't blind them as long as they didn't look directly at it. The protagonist quickly grew worried about their classes. They might have missed them, but Kim assured him she was keeping track, so there was nothing to worry about. That was because the time since they had gone to the training room hadn't changed at all, even though it felt like more than 10 minutes had passed. Kim explained that both in dungeons and in the training room, time always stopped when they were teleported somewhere else. Or perhaps it was more accurate to say that time slowed down in that world. When the protagonist stopped to think about it, he remembered that when he entered the rookie dungeon, the time outside hadn't changed when he came back. It was quite convenient if someone wanted to spend time alone or even use it to study for exams. Ganggu was surprised to see that Kim used it to improve her grades, but she replied that she was simply using the special spaces wisely. Besides, her grades were already good even without accessing the other world. That made Gang laugh, but Kim decided they should go back to class. They could meet later and enter a dungeon together. Time passed, and the protagonist was still distracted by his own thoughts. Hyun turned around and saw his friend staring at him for some reason. Something was different about him. Ganggu wondered what was wrong. For some reason, Hyun was furious at him, and so was Young. Now the protagonist knew he was in trouble with those two being so close. Even Ji-Sin was looking at him with a smile for some reason. She bet she wanted nothing to do with a loser like him, especially after he had beaten up his boyfriend. Ganggu couldn't focus on class with everyone staring at him like that. He just wanted the lessons to end quickly so he could leave once and for all. But it was a pity because even when class was over, he couldn't leave. He even wondered if he should transfer to another school and finally find some peace. Time went by and classes ended. As soon as the teacher left, Young ran to Ganggu, along with Hyun, who also wanted to talk to him, and the protagonist ran away. He just wanted to be alone, but the two were chasing after him. It didn't take long for Gang to refuge inside the student council room, preventing the other two from catching him. They were even more surprised to see Kim there. Inside the room, Kim noticed that Ganggu had arrived running and asked if he was that excited for the dungeon. Even though he lied, she asked if they could enter a mid-level dungeon. Ganggu got worried because the mid-level dungeon was still too much for him, but she assured him that everything would be fine as long as they worked together. The dungeon level didn't really matter, they just needed to focus on having some fun inside. First, she sent him an invitation to join her party, and the protagonist accepted. Right after that, a light teleported them directly into the dungeon. Ganggu was amazed by the place. It was very different from the beginner dungeon. The beginner dungeon had been more like a rocky mountain, full of bears when he entered. He remembered that dungeon terrain always changed each time someone entered. It wouldn't always be a desert like the one they were in now. Normally, to clear a mid-level dungeon, a player needed to be at least level 25, and she shared his quest with him. Ganggu had the ability to increase his stats 5 times faster than normal, which is why Kim believed that in the end, everything would work out. The mission in the mid-level dungeon was to hunt 30 slimes. It didn't take long before several slimes started appearing around them. Ganggu was completely flustered, trying to get organized, when Kim quickly stepped back. He expected her to handle at least half of them, but she just moved away, deciding to simply watch him fight. She wanted to see how useful his stolen stats would be in dungeons like that. Ganggu ended up jumping into the fight against the slimes, and it was chaos. They attacked him like projectiles, giving him barely any room to counterattack. For some reason, those slimes were all incredibly fast and strong. Kim warned him not to let his guard down like that. They were quite powerful, even if they were just slimes. After all, it was a mid-level dungeon. They might look cute, but they still needed to be properly defeated. Then the protagonist decided to attack, but his foot got stuck in a slime. His blows weren't working at all. Ganggu wondered if it was because he was still too weak. It seemed like nothing he did caused any real damage to them. Kim asked if he wanted a few tips from a professional, and explained that normal attacks wouldn't work unless he put real power into them. He could see the slime's cores when they weren't aggressive. He needed to strike them before their formation was complete, using either magic or a weapon.
Ganggu didn't have any magic available available and didn't even know where to get a weapon. Then he remembered the wooden staff he had received some time ago. He decided to take it out and attack the slimes with it. This time, he managed to deal some damage. Now, he was ready to defeat them all. Kim noticed that even though Gengu was only level 8, he could still handle the slimes. Though she found his stats strange, it was as if he were a level 40 player. It didn't take long for the protagonist to finish the mission. The 30 slimes were defeated and they completed their objective. Kim came down from where she was, applauding the protagonist who had completed the quest. It didn't take long for the game to recognize his victory and offer several rewards. Gengu leveled up, but Kim was surprised because it was much more than just once. When she checked his stats, she realized that the protagonist had reached level 17. Obviously, he had gained almost 10 levels at once after completing that mission. She had already said before that normally no one could handle a mission like that, let alone clear a dungeon like this. Now he could do it right by her side. Kim commented that she could hunt 100 slimes and still not gain a single level. Yet the protagonist did the same and received an enormous amount in experience. In that case, they could use each other to earn rewards. She suggested that he should distribute his new stat points right away. Gengu was surprised that she told him to do it immediately. He agreed since he would gain the effects instantly and no one knew what could happen once he did. Then he wondered how he should allocate his stats this time. The protagonist decided to increase his attributes since they felt fun just like an online game. Gengu finished soon after. Out of nowhere, Kim decided to land a kick right to the protagonist's face. He was completely caught off guard by the sudden attack and could barely react. When Gengu noticed, his attack seemed even slower than before, his kicks weaker and heavier. She had plenty of time to dodge them. Kim kept advancing toward him, launching several attacks in a row. The two kept exchanging blows for a while, with Gengu always on the defensive. The truth was, she was actually quite impressed. He had only distributed a few points, yet that was already enough for his attacks to be properly neutralized this time. Gengu complained because she had attacked him again without any warning. It really hurt, even if it hadn't caused much actual damage to his body. She simply replied that the protagonist should be able to endure a little pain. A normal level 17th player would have died after being hit like that. Anyway, Gengu asked what would happen if he ever died inside a dungeon. She replied that the dungeon might seem like another world, but it was still reality. If he died during a dungeon mission, he would die in real life too. Now that they were done, she suggested they should collect their rewards and head back. The reward was a necklace that granted 2 additional intelligence points. She complained that that was all they got after so much effort. Gengu asked if she wanted the necklace, but she refused. To her, it was just junk, but he could keep it if he wanted, so Gengu decided to hold on to it. Then he asked why Kim was spending so much time with him. Kim replied that it was simply because he was an overpowered player. His stats were 5 times higher than normal, and that could be very useful for her. That way she would have the chance to clear dungeons she normally couldn't handle alone. Besides, Kim could level up with relative ease. Surely, Gengu would realize that over time as well, since this was a game that would only get harder as it progressed. So she decided they should go back, and the two of them left the dungeon. Back in the real world, Gengu sighed because he could never get used to those transitions. And as expected, not even a single second had passed in reality. He had gained several levels and a new item in such a short amount of time. While he was quite satisfied, Kim said goodbye, telling him that was enough for today. She had something else to do and decided to leave waving her hand. Yang realized she should probably head home too, since the time was right. In that case, she suggested they could walk back together. However, when they left the classroom, they ran into Young and Hyung. She asked what those two idiots were doing just standing there. Both wanted to talk to Gengu, but he was ready to run away, only to be caught by the two waiting outside. They still wanted answers about certain things they had decided to investigate. However, Hyun-soo noticed something strange about Gengu. He no longer emitted that same aura he had a short time ago. Something odd had happened. Now was his chance, and the protagonist decided to run away immediately. It didn't take long for him to get home and see his mother. She immediately asked if he was hungry, but Gengu said he was fine. In fact, he was a bit tired, so he would head straight to his room to rest. A lot had happened that day, and he just wanted some time to himself. Still, his mother asked if something had happened at school. When he looked confused, she decided to let it go and let him rest. Gengu clarified that nothing had happened, so there was no need to worry. What had happened earlier was just an accident, and he swore he didn't need to think too much about it. He promised that everything would go back to normal and that no other incident would occur. His mother began to cry.
feeling truly relieved. She had been worried since he had been acting differently lately. Gangu assured her there was no need to worry so much, though she still looked emotional.
Back in his room, the protagonist soon received some notifications on his phone. As expected, they were from the real-world app again. Ray appeared, greeting him after such a busy day. She probably missed him, since he hadn't received any missions this time. Gangu replied that it wasn't so bad. If he had interacted with her that day, he probably would have gotten lost along the way as a result. However, Ray was surprised to see he had gained so many levels in just one day, and asked what he had been doing all that time. Gangu was a bit surprised too, since the assistant was now talking to him so actively. He had thought she'd been avoiding communication during that period. Either way, Ray forced a smile and paused before giving him a new mission. They could talk about it before anything else. The mission of the day was to form a team with a friend and clear a dungeon. He would be rewarded with a random item box upon completion. But soon, Ray realized he had already done that with another player named Kim, which made her sigh. She clearly wasn't in the mood for that and decided to skip the mission altogether. If he failed, he'd instantly receive a random hair loss box as punishment. Gangu was stunned that she would just hand out something like that. Apparently, a random amount of his hair would fall out, which was just too much. Still, Ray decided to let him take the mission anyway and wished him good luck. He'd have 6 hours to complete it, with Gangu by his side. Basically, he had no choice but to do the same mission twice in a row. Being threatened with hair loss was a real pain. Suddenly, he received a call from an unfamiliar number. It wasn't in his contacts, but the number seemed strangely familiar. When he answered, he heard a woman's voice on the other end. She asked if he didn't recognize her voice, and Gangu wondered who it could be. Then the woman said she was a bit disappointed he didn't recognize her voice. That's when he realized it was Jisun, and he froze the moment it clicked. She laughed, saying the loser otaku had finally recognized her voice after all this time. She wanted to talk about the confession she had made. However, Gangu immediately hung up on her, which caught her completely off guard. Jisun screamed in anger because that idiot had just ignored her like that. But the protagonist was far too embarrassed to talk, not understanding why she would suddenly call him in the middle of the night. He panicked and even turned his phone off right away. Moments later, the phone rang again. Jisun was trying to call him back. It wasn't like he was going to answer, and even Jen was surprised. After all, he really wasn't planning to pick up. Jisun grew more and more irritated. That bastard had chosen to ignore her even after her confession. Either way, finding out where he lived would be easy enough. Later that night, Gangu called Kim to meet him at the park. She immediately got smug, thinking he might have fallen for her, but he quickly denied it, saying that wasn't the case at all. It was something important. He explained that his mission was to form a team and enter a dungeon. There wasn't much time left, and the penalty for failure was losing hair. When she heard that, Kim burst out laughing, thinking it was ridiculous. Gangu yelled angrily, saying it was serious, and he really needed her help. Even while laughing, she agreed and suggested they should go for a hard dungeon this time. Normally, it was meant for players around level 30, but for Gangu, it would be easy. He accepted immediately, and soon she opened the dungeon. The two appeared inside, and Gangu was stunned by its size. This was what a proper high-level dungeon should look like. He was surprised that even Kim had never been in one before. It was her first time too. She had always had the option to enter, but being weaker and below level 30, it had been too much for her back then. Now that she was finally there, she was a bit nervous. Suddenly, the two heard a loud noise that sounded almost like an earthquake. The mission in the intermediate dungeon was to defeat the orc army. A massive number of orcs came rushing out from inside the temple. Gangu was terrified when he saw how many monsters were charging at them. He asked her if she knew how strong they could be, but even Kim didn't know. She just reminded him that they had to be extremely careful. After all, if they died in the dungeon, death in real life would also be certain. That dungeon was the second intermediate one, meant for players level 30 or higher. Kim had planned to enter one of those only when she reached level 40 or above, which meant she had never been in one before. Gangu grew worried, asking why she had come there at all. She just laughed, saying that she obviously brought him there because she trusted him. Gangu was the great thief, a player she intended to use to her advantage. Even so, he was scared by the idea of facing so many orcs alone. It didn't take long before Gangu was struck by an orc and sent flying like paper. On the other hand, Kim grabbed her weapons and decided to attack immediately. Maybe it had been a mistake coming there. She was starting to admit that now.
Still, she kept fighting, cutting down one orc after another, until one suddenly appeared behind her, forcing her to retreat quickly. Gangu ran over to check if she was okay. She replied that there was no need to worry. She wouldn't die from something like that. Facing them alone would be impossible anyway. Kim asked the protagonist if he thought he could defeat them. The orcs were terrifying and huge, but he replied that he thought he could. Gangu charged at an orc right away while she watched him fight. From the way he had endured the previous attack, she realized Gangu was truly powerful. He had no trouble at all. These guys were nothing to him now that he was really fighting with a weapon. Kim watched the scene closely. He was still only level 17. He hadn't even unlocked any skills or flashy abilities, but he was taking down the orcs easily with raw stats alone. Gangu kept fighting the monsters for quite a while, and when it was finally over, Kim realized that she had been a bit worried about him before. After all, he was still under level 20, but he really handled them all. In the end, she was impressed. It was genuinely amazing. It didn't take long for the game to recognize that they had completed the mission. Quickly, both of them leveled up several times at once. Even Kim reached level 33 and was happy to have gained experience. She had been worried because she hadn't leveled up recently, especially after reaching level 30. She couldn't believe she had made it that far. Gandu commented that he also felt much stronger after everything. Kim agreed, saying it was because he came from the other intermediate dungeon. That's what she expected. They just needed to keep it up and face even more dungeons like that one. As long as they could stay together longer, she could reach the maximum level. Kim was truly happy about that. She even wanted to kiss Gangu because, after all, he was her golden goose. Of course, she was only teasing, though she was genuinely happy. It seems they wouldn't get any rewards this time. Maybe it was better just to go back. Gangu laughed in response. It was just a game after all, but still felt disappointed about not receiving rewards. Back at the park, Gangu realized he had leveled up to 25. Now much stronger than before, he wasn't earning as much experience from missions anymore. Even so, Kim praised him, saying they had accomplished a lot that day. They could team up again and explore other dungeons in the future. But for now, she needed to go back to study and focus on school.
Sighing, the protagonist realized it was time to head home and relax. However, he noticed his phone buzzing with a notification that surprised him. It was Jisian sending a message saying she was coming to his house and that it would be better if they met after everything that had happened. Gangu was shocked and wondered if the song had involved his girlfriend in all this. It seemed like he was trying to mess with them, knowing that Gangu had gotten involved with Jisan. Gangu couldn't understand how things kept getting worse. Meanwhile, Jisian was furious, waiting for him. He wasn't replying to her messages or answering her calls, clearly ignoring her. She swore she'd get back at him when she found him. When Gangu caught a glimpse of her, he could tell she was enraged. More than anything, he wanted to know how she had even found his address. For a moment, he thought it might be best to just wait for her to leave so everything would blow over. But Jisian was so angry that she stayed there as long as it took. What Gangu really didn't expect was that his sister would be arriving home. Naturally, Jisian took the chance to approach and talk to her. When she heard that the girl was Gangu's sister, Jisian said she was his classmate. She added that it was nothing serious, but she found it strange that he wasn't answering her. She felt like he was ignoring her. That left his sister a bit surprised, especially since she had been suspecting that Gangu had gotten her girlfriend. Now she was really impressed. Her brother seemed to be involved with such a beautiful girl. Even more impressive, he was managing to ignore her. While Jisian was worrying about that, his sister quickly invited her inside, assuring her that her brother would arrive any minute. But before she could let her in, Gangu came running. He quickly grabbed Jisian by the arm and dragged her outside in a hurry. Even Jisian was surprised that Gangu could suddenly run like that. She thought she might faint from all the running, but soon stopped, demanding to know why he had been ignoring her, not answering calls or messages. It really seemed like Gangu had been hiding from her all this time. The protagonist asked why she was showing up at his house now. She replied that it was only because he always ignored her. Gangu said there was no reason to answer if she just wanted to bother him. Jisian asked when she had ever said she wanted to bother him that much, and he replied that it was because he had just ended up fighting with Tasong. That's why he thought Jisen hated him, since she was Tasong's girlfriend. But Jisian explained that they had already broken up some time ago. Gangu was surprised by how fast it happened, but she seemed fine. She said she wasn't interested in losers and had heard that Gangu liked her. He was still a bit of a loser, but now he didn't seem so bad. And he was good at fighting too. She thought it could actually work. That's when Jisian decided she would give Gangu a chance. That completely caught him off guard, but Jisian was serious and didn't want to repeat herself. She came even closer, practically shouting that she really would give him a chance. In that case, Gangu should have been more excited, or at least happy. After all, she was someone popular and still wanted to date a loser like him. Even so, Gangu was too distracted by his own thoughts to understand what she meant, and he just ran away, ignoring Jisian's protests.
At school, his life only became more complicated than usual. Jisian kept complaining, realizing that this was exactly why people called him a loser. Meanwhile, other delinquents were watching, shocked. They thought maybe it was time to tell Taesong everything once and for all. Back home the next day, the protagonist was greeted by his mother, who was surprised to see Gangu awake so early. She made him breakfast. Then his sister approached, asking if he had made up with his girlfriend. The other sister said she had heard about it too. She couldn't believe it. After all, the girlfriend had suddenly appeared and even visited their house. Gangu tried to stutter out that it wasn't like that at all, but they wanted to know more, insisting it must be true since he was planning to get ready to go out. Gangu's sisters knew Jisian was a very pretty girl and already assumed they were dating. They all got excited, even with Gangu denying everything. He protested, but they concluded it had to be true. Running to his room, the protagonist wondered why all this was happening. He still couldn't believe that a girl had confessed to him for the first time in his life. And now Jisian was confessing again and chasing after him. Her of all people. Still, he thought maybe she was just a delinquent trying to tease him again. Even so, Gangu felt really good about it and couldn't help but feel happy. Then he received a new notification and quickly realized it must be from real world again. Indeed, it was an alert saying that his manager was waiting for him for a meeting. Soon, Ra spoke to Gangu and greeted him, saying it was nice to see him again. The protagonist replied that, unfortunately, he didn't want to see her again. But she ignored that, saying they could start the day having fun with a new mission. While the protagonist was distracted on his phone, his sisters were eavesdropping from outside. They thought Gangu was talking to his girlfriend, and they could even hear her voice. Even though he denied it, they wanted to believe it was true. In the end, the sisters laughed because Gangu was embarrassed to that point. It was almost cute. Suddenly, when the protagonist opened his bedroom door, he saw them two stepping back. He asked what they were doing there, and they laughed nervously, saying it was nothing, but they were clearly listening in. Gangu left the room complaining about why they cared so much about his life. He had a mission, or rather a plan, and decided to go out for a while. He told his mother, who was worried because he hadn't even had breakfast. The protagonist assured her he would grab something to eat on the way. However, before he could leave, Gangu bumped into someone who suddenly appeared. Asking where he was rushing off to, it was his father speaking, which shocked the whole family. The father being home was truly a miracle and a rare sight. It had been a long time since they had seen him, and he said he had missed them. Since the father was home, one sister suggested that they should all eat together. Gangu got nervous because he had a ridiculous mission with very little time to complete it. He had to eat 3 huge hamburgers in 30 minutes. Because of that, the protagonist declined the invitation and ran out of the house apologizing. But he assured them that it was good to see his father again after so long. His sister quickly got annoyed because that brat had just ignored his father. They hadn't seen him in ages, and yet he was putting his girlfriend first. The father said it was fine since he knew Gangu must be busy. The sisters mentioned his girlfriend, and the father was surprised to hear that. They said she was a very pretty girl, but then the father was caught off guard when the mother questioned whether he planned to show up at home without warning. She even suggested that he might as well marry his job.
He quickly realized his dear wife was in a bad mood and apologized, explaining that he had been very busy all this time. He approached her, trying to please her, and told her that the company had just announced a new game, which was turning into a much bigger project than expected. But it would be done soon and he'd be able to come home more often. He hoped, at least, that his wife would forgive him this time. After sighing, she agreed, as long as they could all eat together. The mother noticed that Gangu had gone out to eat with his girlfriend, and the sisters confirmed it, saying they had heard him talking to her on the phone earlier. Still, they found the conversation strange when they listened more carefully. It wasn't about setting up a date or anything like that. In fact, they were talking about completing a mission with rewards and penalties, and something about a real world. Maybe it was some kind of game. That immediately caught the father's attention, though he didn't say anything despite being surprised. The sisters commented that his girlfriend must also like games. Usually people found partners with similar interests. Meanwhile, the protagonist was very busy eating those hamburgers. It was a ridiculous mission, but he had to finish it. He could barely eat one. The truth was, Gangu much preferred his mother's cooking. Then he saw his phone start to ring. It was Hyun calling. That caught him off guard, making him ask why he was calling so suddenly. Still, he answered and decided to go out and meet his friend. Things between them had been pretty awkward ever since they discovered the real world. Hyun said they could meet up without any problem since they were friends. Gangu just laughed in response. It didn't seem like anything serious. His friend only wanted to ask one thing, about the mission in the real world. But before anything else, Gangu noticed that Hyun looked quite different from before. He had changed a lot, and Gangu wondered if he was even the same person he knew. Hyun got irritated by all of Gangu's questions. Gangu then wondered if he just looked different because he wasn't wearing his school uniform. Hyun yelled at his idiot friend, saying that he had lost 9 kilos, and even then Gangu hadn't noticed something so obvious. There was a mission about losing weight, and he wanted the reward. That's why he had changed. Now Gangu can understand that he had transformed a bit.
it, but honestly, he looked quite different. Anyway, Hyun had called him there for a special reason. He had a quest that required forming a team with a friend to clear a dungeon. Since Gangu was the only player friend he had, he wanted his help for that. The protagonist replied that they were also friends in real life and hadn't met properly yet. That was something Hyun didn't want to hear after all that. Hyun only wanted to know if Gangu would cooperate and join his team. And of course, Gangu agreed, even though the mood between them was still a bit awkward. In fact, it was a good chance for them to reconnect. Hyun got all excited and thanked him, promising to pay for his lunch. Gangu immediately felt sick just thinking about hamburgers. For now, Hyun decided to send a team invitation. That's when he was surprised to see that his friend was already level 25. He questioned how he had become so strong in such a short time. Even though Hyun did missions every day, he had only reached level 15. Gangu just laughed a little, not really giving the answer Hyun wanted. But Hyun knew his friend had started playing a bit earlier than him, so he probably understood more about how things worked. Still, it felt like a bug. Normally, the higher the level, the harder it should get, not easier. He thought he'd catch up to Gangu soon, but he ended up being surprised instead. Hyun had leveled up 7 times in just one day, which was really impressive. It seemed like he truly loved playing, and that showed in his behavior. However, they could talk about that later. For now, they needed to focus on the mission. After forming a team, the two were teleported to meet inside the dungeon. It was a beginner dungeon for level 1 players, requiring only 5 levels to enter. The field seemed to change every time they entered the dungeon. Gangu asked what the mission was this time, and soon it appeared before them. This time they had to defeat around 20 goblins in the beginner dungeon. Hyun was fine with that. He had already completed his main quest of forming a team and was also able to enter the dungeon with the protagonist thanks to him. So Hyun didn't intend to make Gangu do the work of killing monsters for him this time. He'd take care of everything on his own this time, and the protagonist didn't mind that. It didn't take long for the goblins to start appearing, and Hyun got ready. He even told the protagonist that he could leave the dungeon now, and Gangu agreed, but still stayed to watch the battle unfold in front of him. Hyun got excited as he charged in to fight the monsters alone. He had cleared other dungeons before without even breaking a sweat, and was proud of that. However, something felt off, and he looked up. That's when he saw several other goblins gathering in the trees, preparing an ambush. As a result, he ended up being attacked several times in quick succession. Hyun was confused about what was happening. They were just goblins, yet they were way too strong even after clearing the last dungeon. This one was supposed to be easy, but suddenly he was being overwhelmed. For some reason, the difficulty had increased after he entered with a team. Not to mention the one that hit him with full force was still standing. It looked like his attacks weren't doing enough damage. In truth, Gangu was just watching, but he realized things were getting bad for his friend. For some reason, the goblins were persistent and wouldn't die even after repeated attacks. He wondered what would happen if someone died in the game. Maybe it would be game over in real life. But more importantly, a skilled player like Hyun was actually struggling. That was unbelievable for Hyun, who had handled everything so easily. After a moment, Gangu decided to step in and help his friend during the fight. He approached, apologizing because he knew he didn't want help, but it looked like he was in real danger, so he decided to assist anyway. After some more fighting, it didn't take long for them to finish the mission. Hyun was still trying to understand what was going on with the protagonist. After all, he was way stronger than normal, which made him wonder how that was even possible. He had managed to defeat all the goblins